Before Peter Monteverdi put his own name on powerful Swiss Grand Tourers, he built a tiny 1-liter fastback for Monteverdi Motors called the Turismo. It promised 185 kilometers per hour from Ford Anglia hardware. Yet the car was so rare that historians still disagree over how many were actually completed. The story began in Binningen, near Basel, where Monteverdi took over his family's automotive business in the mid-1950s. Racing mattered more than comfort. Under the name Monteverdi Motors, his workshop built Formula Junior machines and even produced a Swiss Formula One car in 1961. The Turismo was an attempt to carry that lightweight thinking onto the road. Often labeled a 1961 car, the first prototype is associated with that year, while public notices appeared around 1962. Its smooth fiberglass body looked like a homegrown Swiss design, but later research revealed a British link. The shell was closely related to the GT Europa coupe from Heron Plastics. Monteverdi created the Swiss interpretation and engineered the package, but giving him sole credit for the shape would go too far. Under that body sat a lattice or tubular frame reportedly weighing only about 22 kilograms, less than 50 pounds. Fiberglass kept the shell light as well. This was the central trick. Instead of buying an exotic engine, Monteverdi Motors removed the weight that an ordinary engine had to move. That engine was a 997 cubic centimeter Ford Anglia 4-cylinder, paired with the Anglia's 4-speed gearbox. Ford had already handled the expensive work of mass production, so parts were obtainable for a tiny Swiss builder. Monteverdi Motors added a Weber carburetor setup, and period claims put output as high as 85 horsepower compared with roughly 45 in standard form. The rest was an international parts bin. Accounts identify Ford console rear axle and brake pieces, plus rack and pinion steering from the Renault Dauphine. A British body idea, English Ford power, French steering, and Swiss assembly all met in one compact sports car. That mix made the Turismo possible without the budget of a major manufacturer. Monteverdi Motors claimed a top speed near 185 kilometers per hour, or 115 miles per hour. For a 1-liter road car in the early 1960s, that sounded extraordinary, but no surviving independent instrumented test confirms it. The number may reflect a highly tuned prototype, gearing calculations, or optimistic promotion, so it belongs to the car's legend rather than the verified record. Production was even less certain. Period talk suggested as many as 100 cars, but no series run followed. Later accounts have been read as 1 completed car, 2 prototypes, or even 5 examples. The safest conclusion is that 1 or 2 complete Turismos are firmly plausible, while the figure of 5 may include chassis or unfinished projects. Monteverdi Motors simply lacked the scale to turn a clever prototype into a customer car. The workshop was already busy with racing. Regular production also demanded a steady body supply, assembly, approval, sales, service, and cash tied up in parts. Building one exciting coupe was much easier than supporting 100 owners. That rarity also makes careful buying more important. Buying a classic? One hidden rust spot can turn your dream car into a money pit. Grab Top Intel's Classic Car Buyer's Toolkit, a simple guide with a 6-page printable checklist to spot red flags, estimate repairs, negotiate smarter, and know when to walk away. Link below. For the Turismo, though, ordinary market rules barely apply. There is no useful public auction history, and any value would depend on documented identity, originality, and museum history. A surviving 1961 Turismo was associated with the Monteverdi Museum collection. After the Binningen Museum closed in 2016, the organization directed visitors toward its display at the Swiss Museum of Transport in Lucerne. The Turismo matters because its unfinished business predicted Monteverdi's future. He later returned with expensive grand tourers, outside components, tightly controlled production, and far more power. This little Ford-based prototype was the bridge, part racing special, part road car, and an almost unknown first draft of the company he would become. The Bizzarrini 1900 Grand Tourer Europa looked like a shrunken Italian supercar, yet its engine came from an ordinary Opel. That strange mix was the whole point. Giotto Bizzarrini wanted to turn the glamour of his costly flagship into a smaller, cheaper sports car more people could use. Bizzarrini had worked at Ferrari, and helped develop the ISO Grifo and A3C before building cars under his own name. His flagship paired a low Italian body with a Chevrolet V8, but it was expensive and specialized. When an investment opportunity appeared in late 1965, he began developing a compact alternative around Opel mechanical parts. The prototype reached the 1966 Turin Motor Show, with production expected to follow in 1967. Pietro Vanni is generally credited with the shape, which specialist histories say was refined through wind tunnel work at the University of Pisa. Its low nose, covered headlights, wide rear fenders, and rear-set roof echoed the larger flagship, making the little Europa look more exotic than its engine suggested. Under that body, the engineering focused on low weight rather than excess power. Fiberglass panels covered a steel central structure with front and rear subframes. The prototype apparently tested a D-Dion rear layout, while production cars used independent suspension. Documented survivors also showed double wishbones, coil springs, disc brakes, and a limited slip differential. The 1,897 cubic centimeter Opel four-cylinder produced about 110 horsepower, often with twin Weber carburetors, and drove through a four-speed gearbox, commonly identified as a ZF unit. That output sounds modest until weight enters the picture. At only about 640 to 650 kilograms, roughly 1,400 pounds, the Europa had little mass to move and could make its power count on a fast road. Specialist sources claim a top speed near 128 miles per hour, or 206 kilometers per hour, though that figure should not be treated as an independently verified test result. Later summaries quote 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 10.5 seconds. The gap between those numbers suggests a car shaped for lightness, handling, and sustained road speed, not brutal acceleration away from a stop. Performance was not what killed the idea. Money did. Bizzarrini planned a much larger run and reportedly ordered parts or bodies for dozens of cars, but the required investment and government support never arrived. The company was already fragile, and the original operation collapsed by the end of the 1960s. That collapse left the production total tangled. Bizzarrini's modern official history says fewer than 20 Europas are believed to exist, while several specialist accounts place original factory production around 12. Other cars were apparently assembled later from unused bodies and parts, so both figures may describe different groups rather than contradict each other. Chassis 505 shows how blurred the timeline became. Italian documentation gave it a 1971 build date and a 1974 first registration, years after the usual late 1960s production period. It was not evidence of normal series production. It showed how unfinished components and later assembly could stretch the history of a tiny manufacturer. The Europa finally received American attention later, after the original company had already failed. The praise, therefore, read less like a launch and more like an obituary for a smart idea. A dependable Opel engine, light specialist construction, and true Italian styling and drama could have placed it near the Porsche 911, Lotus Elan, or Alfa Romeo coupes. Survivors now prove the idea had lasting appeal. A prototype candidate sold for €212,750, while a documented chassis brought $140,000. Although their different histories make a direct comparison misleading. The Europa matters because it was not merely an unknown miniature Bizzarrini. It was a believable attempt to make an exotic car attainable, defeated by small company economics before buyers had much chance to discover it. The Fournier-Marcadier Barzoï looked like a pocket-sized exotic, complete with gull-wing doors, yet much of its hardware came from ordinary Renaults. It was not built to overpower bigger sports cars. Its trick was to carry almost nothing. At roughly 540 kilograms, this tiny French coupe turned lightness into its main performance feature. André Marcadier learned metalworking, then built bicycle frames, motorcycle frames, and carts. In the early 1960s, he joined Marcel Fournier to create a light sports racer. Fournier handled mechanical work, while Marcadier focused on the chassis. Patrick Orlando was the body specialist on the Open project, though the evidence does not prove he alone designed the later Barzoï coupe. Customers wanted a closed version, so the team enclosed its race-bred platform instead of creating a heavy Grand Tourer. The debut year remains disputed. Sources place planning in 1965, development in 1966, appearance in early 1967, a first series run from 1967 to 1969, and presentation in 1968. They likely describe different stages, not one clear launch. Beneath the fiberglass body sat a brazed steel tubular chassis. Renault 8-based suspension ideas remained, while a Renault engine was mounted behind the occupants in a rear mid-engine position. The gearbox was reversed or adapted for that layout. Depending on what the customer installed, engine capacity could range from about 998 to 1,600 cubic centimeters. That flexibility came from the business model. The Barzoï was sold as a kit, so buyers could source their own engine, gearbox, instruments, wheels, trim, and other parts. One finished car might be mild and road-friendly, while another could become a competition machine. Horsepower, brakes, weight, and finish varied, which makes any single factory performance claim misleading. The body measured only about 3.60 meters long and 1.56 meters wide on a 2.27 meter wheelbase. More striking was its height, just 0.98 meter, a little over 38 inches. Normal side hinge doors would have been awkward beside the deep tubular structure and very low roof. Gull-wing doors solved that access problem while giving the Barzoï the drama of a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL or an endurance racer. The first series kit cost about 7,000 French francs in 1969. An option linked to the rear suspension added another 1,000 francs. Marcadier could therefore sell the skeleton of an exotic-looking car without financing rows of complete vehicles at dealerships. The trade-off was inconsistency, but the low-cost Renault parts and tiny mass captured the same basic idea that made Lotus and Alpine so effective. About 30 first-series Barzoïs were built, making the 1960s version genuinely rare. A revised type from 1970 to 1972 reached roughly 70 examples. Competition gave the name credibility beyond its looks. Pierre Damas and Max Soleil entered a Barzoï in the 1969 Targa Florio, facing one of the world's toughest road races across the mountains of Sicily. It earned no major result there, but simply appearing put this tiny constructor among serious international machinery. Surviving cars also show why specifications must be treated carefully. A Barzoï sold in 2023 had begun as an unfinished kit, was completed or restored around 1990, and later received a Renault Gordini-based engine, producing roughly 150 horsepower plus upgraded brakes and suspension. Its €46,920 sale price described that developed individual car, not a standard 1960s example. That is why the Barzoï belongs among the decade's most unknown sports cars. It was neither a miniature Ferrari nor a normal Renault in fancy clothing. It was a kit-built French answer to expensive performance. Use accessible parts, remove every possible kilogram, and let a tiny gull-wing body make modest machinery feel special. The Ghia 1500 Grand Tourer looked like an expensive Italian exotic, yet its engine came from an ordinary Fiat sedan. That contrast was the whole idea. Ghia wanted to sell a stylish Grand Tourer under its own name without paying to develop an entire car from scratch. Carrozzeria Ghia was one of Turin's great coach builders. Founded by Giacinto Ghia in 1916, it had spent decades designing special bodies for larger manufacturers and wealthy clients. By the early 1960s, the company had enough fame to try something bolder, become something close to a manufacturer itself. The Fiat 1500 provided the practical foundation. Fiat supplied a proven engine, 4-speed gearbox, suspension parts, brakes, and basic chassis structure. Ghia could then focus its limited resources on the body, cabin, proportions, and final assembly. The prototype appeared at the Turin Motor Show in November 1962. Customer cars followed for public sale in 1963, which is why the model is often called a 1963 Ghia 1500 Grand Tourer, even though its story began 1 year earlier. Sergio Sartorelli is generally credited with the design. He gave the coupe a long hood, a cabin push toward the rear, thin roof pillars, recessed door handles, a low nose, and a clipped tail. It hid the humble Fiat connection well. But this was more than a sedan wearing a prettier shell. Ghia shortened the Fiat's wheelbase from roughly 242 centimeters to about 234 or 235 centimeters. The engine and gearbox moved rearward for better weight distribution, while a tubular front structure added support. Independent coil spring front suspension sat ahead of a solid rear axle on leaf springs, with front disc brakes and rear drums. Power came from Fiat's 1,481 cubic centimeter inline-4, driving the rear wheels. The safest standard factory figure is roughly 67 horsepower, although some accounts claim numbers in the 70s or around 80. Those higher figures may reflect tuning or different rating systems, so they should not be treated as a universal specification. The Ghia relied on low weight and a clean shape rather than brute force. French sales material advertised 170 kilometers per hour, or about 106 miles per hour. That was a period claim, not an independently proven road test result. Ghia's 1963 publicity emphasized agility, stability, lightness, and elegance instead of racing success. Then the small manufacture problem arrived. The car cost about 2.2 million lire, placing it in Porsche 356 territory. Fiat parts made servicing less frightening, but hand-built coachwork kept the price high. Buyers with Porsche money could choose a Porsche, backed by a stronger dealer network and an established sports car name. Production is generally accepted at 846 cars, though older sources disagree. Dates are less settled. Many references give 1963 to 1967, while registry research suggests most construction happened from roughly 1963 to 1965. A Fiat chassis could be built, bodied, sold, and registered in different years, making both timelines possible depending on what production means. That output explains why the Ghia is still so unfamiliar. A specialist registry estimates that fewer than 100 may survive, but that remains a community estimate rather than a certified count. Good cars have sold for tens of thousands, yet on June 24, 2026, a 1964 example brought $900. It was non-running, partly disassembled, rusty, collision-damaged, and missing components, so the price measured the risk of restoring rare coachwork, not the value of a usable car. The Ghia 1500 Grand Tourer matters because it almost made the unknown Italian sports car feel normal. It combined serviceable Fiat hardware with coach-built style, then proved why that formula was so difficult to sell. Its beauty hid ordinary mechanical roots, but its price could never hide the cost of building beauty by hand.